Good afternoon, everybody. My name is François de Borgrave. I'm co-founder of KOIS, and KOIS is a firm specializing in impact investing and blended finance. So we try to drive private sector capital towards projects and companies with positive social or environmental impact. I'm here to talk to you today about an initiative we are developing with UNICEF to develop a fund for water infrastructure financing in fragile context. So hopefully I can get the presentation up. Well, now it's not showing anymore. I apologize about that. Here it is. So yeah, apologize about the technicalities. It's a specific platform, and so here is the objective that we have with UNICEF is to develop a fund where private sector money can come to support the investment at scale into sustainable water infrastructure in places that experience either displacement because of conflicts, of natural disasters, or places where you have a vacuum of governance and not much is happening in terms of infrastructure development. Well, the context for that started from really how emergency water provisioning is done in those contexts. And just to set the scene a little bit, you have about 2.1 billion people on the planet who lack safe drinking water at home. 75% of households in least developed countries lack hand washing facilities. And you can see how disastrous that is in the current COVID context. Over 800 million children, lack soap and water at school. 45% of health clinics in least developed countries lack basic water services. So you really have an extreme gap in those places, an extreme lack of access to what is a primary resource, a primary need of people. And obviously this underinvestment in water infrastructure in those fragile contexts is increasing the COVID-19 risk for those populations. But not only, I mean, this is not a problem that emanated emanated from COVID. It's something that started much before and that has been created problems for a long time. Now, aid organizations are racing to cover the water infrastructure gap. But organizations like UNICEF, who are very much at the forefront of this challenge and this fight, they lack key financing tools to really be able to address that situation. If you look at why those aid agencies cannot easily finance water infrastructure, it's mainly because their internal rules and regulations don't allow them to have that long-term perspective in investments. They cannot borrow to finance infrastructure projects. So they very much rely on investing in temporary systems, things that will basically be affordable for the yearly budget. But when looked at over time, over the years where they are operated, cost really much more. So it's very much this unpredictable short-term humanitarian funding and annuality of budgets that really encourage short-term fixes in the form of water trucking and fossil fueled powered systems. And when you look at the cost of those systems over the years, they're really more expensive than actually building proper long-term infrastructure. They are carbon intensive based on diesel and damaging the local environments. And they're really detrimental to long-term community resilience because you don't really invest in the community for its long-term reinforcements. And these are really big numbers. I mean, UNICEF spends today every year for close to $500 million on WASH projects in fragile contexts, and that was, for example, in the year 2019. Obviously, COVID response has increased these demands for 2020 and certainly the years to come. Issue being also that local governments lack the resources or the political will to develop water systems for marginalized communities. When you think about, for example, refugees, it is a situation in which, in a lot of cases, local governments don't want, let's say, long-term infrastructure to be built in contexts where refugees are present, because that would just, let's say, justify and confirm their long-term presence in that location. Now, what UNICEF realizes as well, and what you can see when you look at the data, is that those situations where UNICEF is intervening in those fragile contexts, where it's supporting the local population, these are very much actually protracted crises, and which actually requires sustainable long-term approach. I mean, when you look at the numbers, usually aid agencies are, when they're doing a humanitarian appeal for a specific situation in a specific location, usually that humanitarian appeal lasts on average 9 years. So very much beyond I would say the times it takes to recoup an investment in infrastructure. And infrastructure costs, usually they typically break even against, when compared to short-term delivery solutions, they break even in 2 to 4 years. So really those 9 years are more than enough to justify the cost of long-term CapEx investments. Obviously, it's to be noted that UNICEF stays in those program countries even after the crisis. So really developing an approach that leverages aid flows towards development solutions rather than humanitarian intervention, I would say, is very much needed. There is just a question being asked about how has the COVID-19 crisis affected the project, and just for all the participants in this panel, of course, feel free to ask questions through the application. But so the question here is, how has the COVID-19 crisis affected the project? Have we found environmental and safe water access issues to have been set aside during the pandemic? Well, basically, I think there's certainly a realization from humanitarian organizations like UNICEF that this is a priority. So from their end, their efforts and outreach to donors and efforts on the ground have certainly not diminished. In the contrary. Now, when you look at donors, they certainly realize that this is an important area. Now there's obviously in this time of crisis, limited resources available to start on different new projects. But so the project is still very relevant, and we have a set of partners that are very supportive of this. But obviously, it's a challenging environment because there are so many needs at so many levels that this is just one of them. But it's obviously a crucial and central one. Just going to take an example of what I just explained about the cost of the short-term solutions being much more than the cost of investing in long-term infrastructure. And this is an illustrative example from northern Nigeria, the town of Maiduguri. That is a community of about 85,000 people in a region, northeastern Nigeria, that is regularly attacked by Boko Haram, the Islamist group. And basically, we see that if we were to invest in long-term infrastructure, we would certainly reduce the cost of water provisioning by 60 to 70%, and that's really huge. So the comparison has been made over 4 years of the costs on the left-hand side of fuel-powered water trucking, $18 million cost over 4 years, 100% paid by aid, with obviously very heavy CO2 emission costs. And if we were to invest in, let's say, a sustainable solar-powered infrastructure, the cost of that would be over 4 years, including operations and maintenance, only $6 million. So very much $12 million of savings out of an initial $80 million budget, and which is not something small in this current context of climate crisis. Significant CO2 savings. So this is really the math and the economics we're facing in those situations. Now, why hasn't there been more investment in infrastructure? So I mentioned earlier on in the presentation the reliance on short-term erratic aid cash flows for humanitarian organizations, which doesn't really allow them to think long-term and invest long-term. But also, why hasn't the private sector stepped into this place to provide the necessary investments? Well, the thing is that there's really few entry points and very high perceived risks from those private sector investors, where they say, well, even if they were to identify opportunities to invest, they would deem the risk much too high to enter into those regions. So there's really no development of efficient, sustainable infrastructure because of that. If you look at the risk that the private sector is facing, the ones that we have identified, I mean, first of all, they might think, okay, I might build some infrastructure and sell water to aid organizations at a much lower price than what they're paying today. But for how long are they going to be there? If, as a counterpart, as a person investing in infrastructure, I'm going to say, well, aid might stop in that region, and UNICEF or other organizations might not be there tomorrow to allow me to recoup my investment over time. So again, I refer to what I mentioned earlier, is that historically, aid has typically been provided for a far longer period of time than the amortization payback period of such investments. Again, 9 years versus the 2 to 5 years needed for to recoup the cost of those investments. So that's one thing where we see that there's certainly mitigation on the preconceived ideas of investors. Then they might think, okay, execution might fail due to security or operational issues. I mentioned Boko Haram in northern Nigeria. Obviously, the city of Maiduguri is regularly attacked by that group. Or investors might think, okay, local public actors might default on their payment or on their execution. And basically the idea there is to pool a large number of projects from different regions, different countries, different settings together in one portfolio, where the investors would be exposed only to that portfolio and not to single projects, so that if some are failing for different reasons, if local actors cannot fulfill their commitments, at least it's not the full investments that is at risk, but only a portion of it. And you can obviously always call on donors to provide some sort of a guarantee, first loss guarantee to investors, so that they step in and they really finance the infrastructure to the benefits of the whole aid community, donors and humanitarian organizations alike. There's a question on the post here about how we managed to foster dialogue with violent groups like Boko Haram and establishing an eventual ceasefire in certain areas. I mean, this is not the work of KOIS. I mean, we're a financing firm, so we're not in the business of interacting with those groups. Obviously, know that organizations like UNICEF, like RCRC, like UNHCR, and so on, are very much in contact sometimes with those groups to be able, indeed, for their interventions to make them as much locally relevant as possible certainly possible in those conflict contexts. But I cannot answer to any specifics of it. So that's and there's another question on how do we coordinate with local actors, including local NGOs. I will come back to that question in the next slide that explains the solution that we have developed and how the different actors play in the role. So that's the next slide and the concept that we have developed of a blended financing facility for water infrastructure in fragile contexts. So where you see, starting from the top side of the chart, investors providing money to a fund, a financing facility, with the aim of getting that money back over time and making a profit out of it. Donors also providing a first loss guarantee to the facility at the broad facility level. So that's very much the global level of the facility, and then how that facility disburses money locally and supports projects locally. Well, it finances local operators, and they can be public operators or private operators, and that's the answer, for example, of local NGOs. It can be local NGOs active in the work of building water infrastructure. But it can be also the local utility, so very much the extension of the local government. It can be local private companies designing, building, operating, maintaining water infrastructure. So basically the money flows to them so that they have means to finance the building of water infrastructure. And then that water is being purchased by water off-takers. I mean, in this case, UNICEF, but it can be other NGOs, other international organizations, who agree to pay up for up to 12 months of water provisioning at a less expensive rate than they were paying in the past, so that they're really making savings on this, but really allowing a certain level of visibility for the water facility that it sees that it can indeed invest in that specific location. And also where UNICEF says, if I'm still there in 12 months and I still have budget after 12 months to purchase water, well, I will do it from the local operator who will then flow the money back into the facility so that the money can flow back to investors. And obviously the last actor that you see on the chart is humanitarian donors who in the past have been financing those water off-takers in their short-term solutions, will keep on financing them for water provisioning, but now based on long-term solutions at a much reduced cost. And the type of things, and that's on the top right corner of the presentation, type of things that are being financed by this are solar water pumps, deep boreholes, water towers, small distribution systems, for budgets typically between $1 and $20 million per project. So and UNICEF has really already identified hundreds of potential projects readily identifiable today for a total value of more than $500 million. So there's really an opportunity to create something at scale with impact at scale. That's about the presentation. Obviously, quick presentation again on UNICEF and KOIS. I'm sure you know one organization more than the other. UNICEF obviously it's very relevant for this facility, is a leading player in WASH globally, working in 64 fragile contexts. So this is really the type of context that they are very familiar with. They have deep expertise and operational experience in WASH. UNICEF typically undertakes 80% of WASH activities in fragile situations, so they cover a lot of ground. They have extensive field experience, long-standing relationships with governments, and it's important to do those projects hand in hand with those governments, even if these are complicated, difficult governments to deal with sometimes. They have very good relationship with water utility operators in fragile contexts. And obviously, as a thought leader in the space and for this project, they have a consolidated, deep fact base, and they developed extensive preliminary analysis that they've done already for this project. At KOIS, we're an international leader in impact investing and innovative finance. We've been doing this for the last 10 years in many countries. And I mean, not necessarily in the water sector, but in a lot of different sectors, such as energy, renewable energy, social housing, healthcare, sustainable agriculture, and so on. And we have really a strong track record in structuring innovative financing instruments for development projects, working with organizations like UNICEF, RCRC, UNDP, USA, DFID, IKEA Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and so on, and so on. We have already developed projects in fragile contexts like this. I mean, when we talked about the city of Maiduguri, we have one project that we have co-designed with RCRC that is implemented today in Maiduguri. I mean, the work that we are designing now with UNICEF stems from thought leadership work that we did on how to apply blended finance for renewable energy powered infrastructure in 8 settings. So, which is also something that we did with UNDP recently in healthcare context. So we have deep expertise there. Now, in terms of the project, we're very much in the execution of the design of the facility. So we're really setting up that facility. The money is not yet flowing on the ground for those projects. We're developing the investment fund, and so we're going now through all the steps that you see here on the screen. So it very much goes from designing a pilot plan, an operational model, a growth plan on how to scale across different geographies, designing the detailed financial structure, the government structure around the fund, and obviously fundraising from investors and donors. There's a question on the post here on how do we hope this edition of the Paris Peace Forum will support the work of our project. Well, first of all, we're very happy to share our insights, our idea with all of you. Obviously, if anyone has any insights that they want to share about the sector, about their experience that we could learn from, we're very happy to collect such contacts and such reactions. We're also still looking for funders to support us in this journey to design the facility. So we already have 3 funders, 2 DFIs and 1 foundations who have confirmed their support for the design of this facility, but we need more support. We have different investors, different DFIs who have already expressed strong interest into such a facility. But again, if there are potential investors in the room, if you're interested by that concept, that opportunity to invest at very, what we believe is a low risk, with a very reasonable and interesting risk-return profile, please reach out. And you have our contact details here in the deck, different people at UNICEF or at KOIS. So please reach out. Also, obviously, still looking for donors. Obviously, would be interested to step into the facility to provide the first loss guarantee. We have different donors identified already who are trading into those sorts of activities, like SIDA, the Swedish Development Agency, the MacArthur Foundations with their Catalyst program, who are all potential participants. But if any person in this virtual room is interested, we're very welcoming for partnerships and conversations. So that is the presentation. I'm gonna bring it. Well, no, I'm gonna leave it to the contact details, so that if anyone has any idea or things they still want to share, you can do it by email through this facility. But I don't know if there are still questions on the post. Don't hesitate to post your question. We have a few minutes left. I think we still have 4 minutes left. So I'm very happy to address any questions, or if the questions that have been raised haven't been sufficiently answered, please don't hesitate to raise, and I will do it. Maybe to make it a bit more tangible to some of you in the room, what we mean by those fragile contexts, well, I mean, obviously, I share the example of Nigeria, but these can be places where you still actually have a conflict today, like Yemen. These can be places like Iraq, Syria, of course, Lebanon, where the situation is very difficult, with a large influx of refugees from Syria, but also places like Sudan, Ethiopia, regions in northern Kenya, but also Venezuela in Latin America, for example, Bangladesh in Asia. So it's very much a whole set of contexts and countries where you find those situations and those opportunities to invest in sustainable infrastructure. I will stop here since there are no more questions on the post. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance and your listening. Thank you for the questions. And if anyone wants to reach out, please don't hesitate. And have a great afternoon and a great weekend to you all. Bye-bye.